All right, so energy flow in ecosystems. On Earth, we have different sources of energy, lightning, volcanic thermal energy, yada, yada. But our main source is the sun. The sun gives us almost all of our energy that we use. So how do we get energy from the sun? As humans, we can't photosynthesize. Well, we have to get that energy sort of indirectly through eating other organisms. We are heterotrophic, like we found out in the previous slideshow. There are three categories of heterotrophs. We have carnivores who only eat other animals, meat. So like this little frog here will eat insects and bugs. This sea lion will eat things like fish. Lions and tigers eat larger prey animals, like antelope, tapirs, things like that. And the owls and snakes will eat smaller, little like furry critters like mice and voles. The next one is herbivores. They only eat plants. It's pretty self-explanatory. Things like rabbits, horses, they only eat plants. And us, we as humans, we are omnivores. We can eat both plants and animals. Whether or not you as an individual choose to do either of those things, that is up to you, but our digestive systems are capable of digesting both meat and plants. Some notable omnivores: bears, love bears, raccoons, dogs are actually, as they've been selectively bred to be our companions, they've developed an omnivorous digestive system. They can't eat all things that we can eat, but they can eat some fruits and vegetables, which makes them omnivorous. All right, energy flow. Because heterotrophs cannot produce their own energy, like autotrophs, there needs to be a flow of energy. It needs to get from the sun to those heterotrophs or consumers. Once again, we did slightly touch on this during the previous slideshow, but we didn't talk about the exchange of that energy and how they relate to the trophic levels that we discovered. So we got to start at the bottom. Producers are the ones that take energy from the sun or chemicals if they're going through chemosynthesis. We'll talk about that in a couple slides. And then they take that energy and put it into bonds. They give us food, glucose. We know this from our photosynthesis unit. The producers are making that energy, whether that's from the sun or chemicals, into usable energy that other heterotrophs can then use to power their life processes. So measuring our energy, we can measure that amount of energy that's converted through productivity, that use of energy. And it can happen in two ways. We have two different measurements. One is called the gross primary productivity, or GPP. This is basically all of the energy that is being used from the sun. And we also have the net primary productivity, or NPP. This is sort of the net energy. This is the GPP minus the amount of energy that the plant needs to use in order to do its biological processes, go through respiration, photosynthesis. And instead of using a food chain or food web, which can get kind of messy and complicated, a better model to sort of show this flow of energy is something called an ecological pyramid. This almost always has producers down at the bottom, and it goes up as we go through our levels of consumers. So each of the levels that we're familiar with, start with the producers, then go to primary consumers, secondary, tertiary, apex, etc. They are their own trophic level, which we've seen in the pyramids. But we lose energy between each level. Why? Well, to be alive, we need to use energy. And a good way to measure that efficiency between levels is to use this ecological pyramid, and it'll help us understand how much energy makes it from one level to the next, and then to the next, and then to the next. We can use it for energy or something called biomass. Biomass is the sort of how much living material that we have. So here's an example. It's more of a marine example this time. We're going to start off at the bottom. Our producers are going to be phytoplankton. They photosynthesize. They use the sun to produce glucose, and they get eaten by their primary consumers, these little zooplankton, little tiny carnivorous creatures that eat up those plants. Then they get eaten by some fish, and those fish get eaten by a seal, and that seal gets eaten by a polar bear, our apex predator. Again, this is very simplified. There are many other things happening in a food web, but just to sort of get the point across, here we have a marine-based ecological pyramid. Energetics. So if you're looking at the vocab list, energetics is one of those big vocab words. Energetics is the study of how we get energy from an energy source like the sun into organisms. And it almost always happens through respiration. So here we are pretty familiar with this process, this link of processes here. We start with the sun, add in some carbon dioxide and water. Lo and behold, we got all our ingredients ready for photosynthesis. Then, as products, we produce oxygen and sugar. Those little plants go, boom, here's some oxygen, here's some sugar. Our consumers, our primary consumers, in this case, it's a little grasshopper insect. It's going to breathe in that oxygen. It's going to eat the plants to get the glucose. And through their respiration, they produce carbon dioxide and water, which then will loop back into the plants, and we go through a little cycle. Here's where I'm going to talk about chemosynthesis. Chemosynthesis is very, very, very similar to photosynthesis, except instead of using the sun energy, it's going to use energy from volcanic vents. So in the ocean, we have all these underwater volcanoes. They produce heat energy, and they also produce a bunch of chemicals. So what's happening with chemosynthesis is that just like in photosynthesis, we get carbon dioxide that goes in. That is a reactant. And instead of sunlight and water, since they're already in water, it's going to consume this H2S, or hydrogen sulfide. That is the chemical that it's going to use instead of like sunlight. It's using heat and this hydrogen sulfide to make some synthesis. We're going to create some glucose. Its products are water. Great. We're in the ocean. Not a big deal. Sulfur, so it's from this chemical over here. And look at that, our beautiful, beautiful glucose molecule that all of the other heterotrophs need, so they'll eat those chemosynthetic organisms. So this here is a heterotroph. It's going to eat that sugar, breathe in that oxygen, and then output carbon dioxide and water, just like a regular aerobic respiration. So let's take a look a little bit more at this efficiency or productivity of an ecosystem. So it doesn't matter where the energy comes from. It could be from the sun, it could be from a volcanic vent, lightning, whatever. We can measure the amount of that energy that gets into producers using productivity. So we're thinking, this example just has the sun and photosynthetic plants. The sun is shining. We as earthlings get all of its, light, its heat, all the fun, good stuff that the sun provides. Only 1% of that sun's energy makes it into our producers. Only 1%. And that 1% is our GPP, or gross primary productivity. So that 1% of sunlight is 100% of the energy that we're going to use in our ecological pyramid. Now, in order to be a living thing, these plants are going to use some of that energy to go through photosynthesis. They're going to respirate, and that takes about 60% of the energy of that GPP. Whatever's left over, that gives us our NPP, or net primary productivity. It'll be about 40%. I always say about because no organism is like, oh, shoot, I hit my 60% max, I need to stop and leave the rest for my NPP. No, it's all just sort of approximate. So breaking down the pyramid, here's another ecological pyramid, but it's focusing on the energy transfer. Producers, they contain 100% of the usable energy in an ecosystem. Emphasis on usable energy. As we move up the pyramid, if you notice, we're losing some of that energy. This is because, hey, we're living organisms. We need energy to live. We need energy to fuel our biological processes, whether that's maintaining homeostasis or digestion or whatever it is. We need energy to live. So we see that at each level, we lose some of that energy. And we're just going to go with a general statement and call it heat, because when we go through biological processes, heat is always a product. So moving to the next level above, here we got our first primary consumers that are going to eat our producers. We see that they only get 10% of the energy from the producers. This is, once again, due to the fact that our producers need energy to be alive. So only 10% of that total harnessed sun's energy is going to the next level. And that pattern continues. Each level is only getting 10% of the previous trophic level. If you think about it, this is why we have fewer tertiary and apex predators. When we look at the trophic levels, if I don't have enough energy available to me, there can't be as many of those organisms. Here's a real life example. There was a study done in Silver Springs, Florida to measure the efficiency of this particular ecosystem. It's kind of like a swampy Florida Everglades type ecosystem. And we're seeing their actual collected data. So the producers are at the bottom, great, they harness 100% of our ecosystem's available energy. And those primary consumers only get 16% of that energy. Seems like more than 10%, but things will eventually even out. Our secondary consumers, only 11% makes it. That's pretty much on par there. About 10% makes it to the next level. And then up here at the very top, our tertiary consumers, only 5%. They only get 5% of that total energy from the previous level. That's where things start to even out a little bit. It should be more, a little bit closer to 10%, but we got a little bit extra during those primary consumers, and we lost a little bit from our tertiary consumers. But anyway, really, really cool real world example. We can see the pyramid effect happening. When we're talking about things like food webs, energy pyramids, we almost always forget about decomposers. They are super duper important. We often forget about them because we don't like to think about them. They kind of represent death, but all living things die. It's just a fact of life. And without decomposers, we might have a real issue in our ecosystem. Decomposers break down dead things and they return those nutrients back to the soil so that our photosynthetic friends, our little plants here, can use those nutrients to then be their producing selves. Without those nutrients, they can't be successful organisms. They need to get nutrients from somewhere, and that somewhere is from decomposers that are decomposing dead material. And if we don't have decomposers, then our plants aren't as successful. We don't have as many plants, and having a cascade effect without as many plants, we won't have as much primary consumers. And if we don't have enough primary consumers, we don't have enough secondary consumers, et cetera, and everything sort of falls apart a little bit. So decomposers are very, very important to our ecosystems. Last little bit here, I want to talk about biomass. I said this word earlier, I'm just going to say it again. Biomass is the total mass of organisms in a given area or volume. And an important note about biomass is that it's a snapshot. It's not like, oh, let's investigate the biomass across 10 years in La Cañada. No, it's on this day, this is our biomass. And these pyramids, these biomass pyramids, are looking pretty familiar to our other ecological pyramids, our energy pyramids. And if you notice, the one on the bottom is the biggest, the one on the top is the smallest. And let's break it down for a second. If you think about, okay, let's take La Cañada. If you think about every single leaf and blade of grass in La Cañada, there's gonna be a lot. There's gonna be so many plants, all the trees, all the bushes, all the fields, lots and lots of producers. But then when you think about the next level up, maybe some insects, herbivores, there are fewer of those than there are blades of grass. And if you go up another step on our pyramid here, there are fewer secondary consumers than there are primary consumers, et cetera, until we have very few apex predators. So the biomass is telling us that, hey, look at all of these producers. But because we need to use some of that energy to live, there's going to be fewer and fewer as we go up our pyramid. All right, that's it for the slideshow. Any questions, comments, concerns, clarifications?